he just wore out that young Boston team where they're like, you know what we did without you? We don't really need you coming in and telling us how to do this and that. And you're not really showcasing that, and you're not leading by example. So hopefully he learned from that, because he really wasted a great opportunity this year to make a run into at least the Eastern Conference Finals, and they just get knocked out.
And
they were lucky to get the Pacers when they did. With no Oladipo, that team was just a lame duck.
Right.
And they had no offense at that point.
And I have to believe that made a difference, Justin. I mean, we talked about it last year, and I know you've brought it up, and it's 100% correct, is that when Kyrie 2 years ago in the playoffs was injured and Boston made that huge run and Tatum looked good and so many guys looked good, I think that came back to bite them actually this year, when it's like, okay, Kyrie's here, Hayward's here, you've got this roster, but it doesn't gel. But I think you actually lost the locker room if you're Boston, because those guys are like, how are we not better this year than we were last year? And then I think you lose the buy-in.
Absolutely. And look, Boston had other issues last year. I mean, you could point to Hayward didn't come back. They were trying to play him probably too many minutes early on. But Kyrie was the outspoken guy. Kyrie was the one that was making life harder on himself. Kyrie was the guy that was isolating himself from the team in huddles and then coming out in postgame and ripping the team and ripping the coaching staff and ripping game plans and then talking about free agency and then not wanting to talk about free agency. Kyrie did all that to himself, and he put all that on this team. So actually, I think, Eric, like the next move to talk about Kemba Walker going to the Celtics, I don't necessarily think Kemba is a better individual player than Kyrie, but I think from a locker room and a chemistry standpoint, what he's going to bring to Boston, I think is going to be able to untap a lot of that potential, because I think Kemba is a guy that really has had no help around him for his whole career. Those Charlotte teams, I don't even know if you could name one of the best players on his team. I think last year the second leading scorer on the team was Jeremy Lamb. So now he gets to go to a team where he's going to have Gordon Hayward 2 years off of his injury. Jason Tatum looking to kind of revive his career as he went through, I think, what many would consider a sophomore slump.
Yeah.
Jaylen Brown played better at the end of last year. Marcus Smart's going to play hard for this team. They've got Cantor, who's a loose cannon, to say the least, but they've at least got a bigger guy there. They've got the ability to maybe make another move with this team. They still got some assets and draft picks, things like that. So, Eric, I like the Kemba Walker move by the Celtics. I thought that was a great save once they saw that Horford was gone and Kyrie was gone. I thought the fact that they got Kemba really saved this team, and they didn't have to go into a rebuild mode. They can just reload and go after it again with a different roster.
I can't disagree with that one bit. I think it's a perfect place for Kemba to come in and be a facilitator. I don't think he needs the superstar spotlight on him. I think he can come in, he can run the floor, he can facilitate, get the ball to Hayward, to Tatum, to Smart, and even to Cantor. I mean, I know Cantor's a loose cannon, but he's probably the only guy in the world that's safer in Boston than he is literally anywhere else in the world, because he can't go home. He can't go overseas. So Cantor
can't go to Canada.
Yeah, he's highly invested in staying here and being safe. So I think that Boston team really, Horford's a big loss. I mean, he can do a lot. He's a good post player. He can do a lot with a little baby hook. He can also make a 3-pointer. So Horford going to our Sixers is a move that excites me. And so Boston certainly loses that, but I think Tatum needs to come back up and be the Tatum he was in his rookie year. And if he does, then I think Kemba Walker facilitating that action with some of those other pieces, I think that makes Boston actually a little bit better than really where they were, with Kyrie being a bit of a distraction.
Were you surprised that the Hornets didn't go all in on Kemba with really having nothing, didn't offer him the Supermax?
Yeah, I was, but I think it might have also been a situation where, potentially they didn't publicly offer him the Supermax, but they may have had conversations with Kemba behind the doors, and he really said, look, guys, I mean, I'm going to Boston. There's really nothing we need to make out of this in the media. We don't have to go public with anything. Maybe they offered him the Supermax privately through his agent or whatever, and he turned it down. And I don't know. I don't know how that works behind the scenes. And maybe they told Charlotte early on, just move on. I mean, we're not staying here, so just move on and don't make a big deal about it. But yeah, I was surprised that they didn't make a move for him. But at the same time, if you have a guy that basically tells you 99% of the way that if Kyrie is moving out of there, then I'm going to go lead the point for Boston, then if you're the Hornets, you just start to look around and say, okay, because they're in the same spot that some of these other teams are, like OKC. You kind of go, okay, we don't have a supermax player. We don't have a superstar in our team. Now we're in rebuild mode. Let's not make a big fuss about this. Let's just move on and start working hard on rebuilding.
Yeah, I'd heard that the Hornets, they were more in like the 5-year 170, 175 range. And they weren't really even close to the supermax at 221. And then that's kind of what drove Kemba to start looking around. And when he got 4 for 143-ish, something like that.
Well, and that could very well be because I was not in favor of the Lakers giving him the full $30 to $31 million cap space per year that they had available. I didn't want them to spend all of that on Kemba Walker. I would have been okay with Kyrie Irving or Kawhi Leonard. I would not have been okay as a LeBron guy. I would not have been okay with them spending all of that on Kemba Walker. And so to your point, maybe Charlotte was kind of the same way. Like, well, we love Kemba, but we're not going to invest that much.
No, and look, I think the whole supermax thing for a team like Charlotte, that just puts them in. I mean, you look at what John Wall did. It just puts you in where it destroys your team if something would happen to him. So I think for Charlotte, it's probably the best move. And it's the best move for Kemba. He's done everything he could for that Charlotte team. They never put a good roster around him. They missed every time they got up in the draft, or it was a bad year for picks or something like that. So I think it was good for both of them to get a fresh start. The Hornets can kind of play this year out. They got some expiring deals. They'll have a ton of cap space. They're probably going to be really bad. Maybe they can do the same thing, sell some guys off, or even next year, once they have cap space, take some bad contracts and just start getting assets like we've seen the Thunder do, because that's the only way it seems like you can be relevant in the NBA at this point, is to do that. So, Eric, you hit on a little bit. Al Horford leaves. He goes to our Sixers. So let me ask you this. News started to break. Jimmy Butler was interested in signing with the Heat, and all of a sudden, Sunday night, July 1st, there's a sign and trade deal in place that's going to take Jimmy Butler to the Heat. So, as a Sixer fan, were you happy or disappointed to see Jimmy Butler leave Philly?
At first, I was disappointed, just for the offensive production that he provides when guys like Simmons and Embiid have off nights. And, you and I know very well, since we're Sixers fans and we watch them throughout the playoffs, every game, we know that Butler was basically the biggest contributor in some of those games. So from that standpoint, I think you lose a lot. However, he is a little bit of an unknown, right? He's dynamite in the locker room as well. We've seen that with Chicago. We've seen that with Minnesota. If he doesn't really want to be in Philly, if he's not stepping up and saying, I want to be right here for the rest of, the next 4 years or the rest of my career, I think he's just a dangerous guy to keep around, because, as soon as he's not happy, he becomes a disease. And I think it's addition by subtraction, by letting him go, in the sense that you move the pieces around that you need to move and honor that, and then bring in Horford. I think you actually got better by doing that and signing Harris and kind of keeping some of the core together. We talked about the fact that Redick is gone, but I think Horford, Simmons, Embiid, Tobias Harris, I think you still have a really good starting roster for that team. And again, I talked about Horford is really underrated a lot of times, especially in clutch times and playoff games and stuff like that. This is a guy that has pretty good big game experience, big spot experience. He can produce for you. I'm not disappointed with that. So I like it. I'm going to live with it for sure.
No, I was happy to see them when they signed the Horford deal. I was happy to see that, because look, Horford's a guy that's well respected around the league. And you've got two young stars right now that there's a lot of rumblings and rumors that these two guys are a little bit of loose cannons, that maybe there's not enough work going on behind the scenes. Maybe there's a little too much partying and that kind of stuff that's happening. And these guys really aren't working as hard as fans we probably like to see them. You've got Embiid that's always out of shape, always sick, injury prone. Maybe Al Horford comes in and can kind of get him on the right track and really help him get his body in shape and really take care. Because Al Horford's been a pretty durable guy throughout his career as a big guy. So maybe just having that veteran leadership, and a different veteran leadership than what Jimmy Butler brings. Because Jimmy Butler is definitely an alpha, and that's great in certain spots in those playoff games. You think about game 1 versus the Nets when he was just keeping them in that game and just kind of willing them along and just late in those games would take over when other guys seem to be shying away. That's great. But then you also have the side where he destroyed the Bulls. He got himself, he went nuts in that practice in Minnesota. And it was 2 weeks in, he was arguing with Brett Brown about stuff. So yeah, he self-admits that he's a guy that likes to win, but he wants to do it his way and doesn't really care if he steps on toes to get that. Sometimes younger guys don't really respond to that. So maybe Al Horford has a different personality that will affect these guys because like you said, Eric, this is on paper. I think this is the best starting five in the NBA from 1 to 5. When you look at what they can put on the court, when you're going to have Simmons, Richardson, Tobias Harris, Horford, and Embiid, that's a pretty darn good starting five. So they've got to figure out a way to make this work because the clock is ticking for this team as well. You don't know what's going to happen with Embiid as a big guy, how his health is going to go. We've seen big guys break down. Embiid has not been a model of health, either physically or he seems to catch every viral infection that goes through Philadelphia at this point. So I don't know what the hell he's on, but get that man some vitamins or something. But I think for this team, Eric, it's for a lot of them in this franchise, this is a huge year for them. I mean, Brett Brown, he survived somehow this year. If this team underperforms, he's definitely gone. And if Simmons doesn't start showing some improvement, he could be gone. And if Embiid doesn't grow up, as you've talked about on this show, he might be a guy that has to go and try to sell high on him. So it's a big year for this Philly team. For Jimmy Butler, Eric, I never understood the Miami side of things. I didn't understand why he wants to go to Miami. He talks about he wants to win games and win championships. I don't see how he thinks that's going to happen in Miami. So do you think it was just he wants his own team? He wants to live in South Beach. Maybe he likes the lack of state income tax in Florida, or is there something else here I'm missing?
Part of me thinks he's a little odd, just like Kawhi is, just in terms of personally, because he never seems to be happy. And I think that is part of it. If, without knowing the guy and just completely speculating, I think it's like, look, Miami's not very good right now. Dwayne Wade is not the face of that franchise anymore. Maybe Jimmy Butler goes down to be the face of the franchise, but they're a long way off. They're not going to compete for the Eastern Conference Finals this year or even probably anytime soon. I still see Milwaukee and, Boston and Philly and other teams that are going to obviously get a lot better, like Brooklyn, teams that are going to continue to come up out of the East, and Miami's just not one of them right now. So I don't know. I think it's a lot of just, hey, I want to live in South Florida. I want to be the face of a franchise and just play basketball, because it's certainly not a decision that aligns with winning championships.
Do you think now that, look, there was rumor that the Heat wanted in on the Westbrook deal, but they're a hard cap team, so they can't take back more money than they were going to send out. So do you think that they are going to try to work something out to make a move to get a Chris Paul in there and try to do some kind of iteration of Chris Paul, Jimmy Butler, and then whatever's left of that roster that doesn't get traded at this point? Do you see them making a move that direction?
I mean, at this point, how would we say no? We don't see a move being made, because we get surprised every day by the NBA, right? That's one of the things that makes it such an exciting soap opera lately. So yeah, I could see something like that happening, but I still just don't think it moves the needle for me. I don't think it gets Miami into contention. Maybe it gets them into the middle of the pack. But if John Wall comes back and is healthy at all, and the Wizards can get their act together, I still think they're, a lower half of the playoffs type of team here in the near future. I think, I don't know. I just don't see Miami. Maybe I'm surprised. Maybe they will ball better than I think, but I just don't see, even with a Chris Paul and a Jimmy Butler, I just don't see them being relevant in the Eastern Conference.
No, I don't either. But you always know Pat Riley seems to be willing to go out and take chances on guys, and he's not afraid to do that. And when you look at, like, Goran Dragic has a $19.2 million deal that's expiring. Maybe a deal like that attracts them, and they have a ton of other guys that are in that $11 to $15 million range that they could piece some stuff together. Maybe it's Bam Adebayo that they send out a younger piece that Oklahoma City actually wants and feels like could be a piece that they could to have on this team as they start the rebuild. So I don't think it's out of contention. I think that's a team that's been rumored to be ready to be pretty aggressive. It's just, can they put the right pieces together and the right deals at this point, Eric? So that may be something to keep an eye on here in the next few weeks as